Kicking off at number 5, the Forgotten Ones, the Dresden Files. Now, it's not a closely guarded secret that over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, we're pretty huge fans of Jim Butcher's incredible Dresden Files series and the many twisting and turning horror tales of Harry Dresden that have expertly managed to reinvent and repurpose pretty much every horror trope ever created and presented in one of the most refreshing and cinematic franchises of recent times. Yeah. Kind of goes without saying. And just as vampires, werewolves, and other such monstrosities have been fan-serviced by Butcher, of course, the many monsters of cosmic horror have to get their fair representation as well. The thing is though, and why this entry comes in at number 5, is that compared to some of his other horror reinventions, the old ones are pretty classic cosmic horror actually. In a similar fashion of Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, the old ones are an ancient race of demonic gods that once ruled the mortal world but were later cast out and locked away from reality. And again, in a similar fashion, being primal spiritual entities that harken back from the cosmic void of existence, they can never truly be destroyed or defeated. Always the case. In Butcher's series, they exist in the outside, a place that exists outside of mortal reality, beyond the outer gates, where they are tended to by the outsiders, the servants and foot soldiers of the old Forgotten Ones, because, you know, when you're a great hulking space lord, incomprehensible to the human mind, you're certainly not willing to lift a tentacle unless you have to. However, not all of these powerful monstrosities are alike and locked behind the confines of reality, and some of the old ones, such as the Sleeper, where have we heard that name before, are instead imprisoned and entombed here on Earth. In a similar kind of fashion, the Sleeper has his own version of fanatical cults that are willing to offer their life force for an old god that they've never even met. Again, always the case. The thing is though, in the actual content of the series, the outsiders are probably the more terrifying of the two, particularly he who walks behind and he who walks before. But hey, even they have to answer to someone. Swinging in at number 4, the Illithid, Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons. And truth be told guys, any opportunity that we have to feature some of the canonical horrors of Wizards of the Coast and perhaps the greatest tabletop role-playing game ever created, actually scratch that, it is the greatest tabletop role-playing game ever created, then we will. And I know that quite a few of you Top 5 Scary fans are also fans of D&D too, so yeah, there's that. Now, it's also probably pertinent to note that the reason that Stranger Things took the name of the Mindflayer as their gigantic upside-down end boss owes itself to this particular race of psionic nasties. And if you think that many-limbed monstrosity was terrifying, think again, because these little weirdos will crawl in your ear and make you do things that you do not want to do. Double also, we should highlight the fact that, like the Dresden Files, D&D as a whole has had plenty of time to take pretty much every horror and fantasy concept going, and over its 5 editions, smelt it into a far more terrifying version of itself. The Mind Flayers, also more formally known as Illithids, which means mind rulers in Undercommon, are an evil, sadistic race of aberrations feared by all sentient creatures of the natural world and the rest of the multiverse that draw upon the psionic energies of their victims. The Mind Flayers seek to expand their dominion over all other creatures, controlling their minds in an effort to use them as hopeless slaves, in turn devouring their brains to feed on for sustenance. In the Underdark, which essentially is a network of terrifying caverns that even a Balrog would fear, the many dark and evil creatures that call that place home, the Deepals and Beholders included, have a great deal of respect for the Mind Flayers because their capacity for evil pales in comparison to them. You see, the Mind Flayer itself isn't exactly humanoid, but instead is a tadpole-like creature that is hatched from a clutch of illithid eggs that during maturity is implanted into a humanoid victim. It then devours the humanoid's brain, taking its place before merging with their humanoid body and transforming into a brand new illithid. Yeah, these guys are gross and they'll wipe your whole party if you're not careful. Next up at number 3, the Old Drujahad. And you know what guys, this is actually a rare occurrence because really, we should talk about Hellboy more often on this channel. Whatever you think about the movie series aside, Mike Mignola's series of graphic novels is a must-read for any horror fan, and despite featuring the literal son of Satan himself in a starring role as the giant-fisted, red-skinned hero of the multiverse, it is a series that does a pretty stand-up service to the cosmic horror subgenre. And when your hero is Hellboy, it kind of goes without saying, but your antagonistic villains have got to be pretty damn terrifying. Let me introduce you to the Old Drujahad, the Dragons of Revelation, the Beast, the Serpent, the 7 gods of chaos, and the horrifying god race of serpentine tentacles that are destined to bring about the end of the world as we know it. You see, as the Hellboy series explains, in the beginning of time, God created an order of spirits to watch over all of existence, and one of these spirits, Anum, created the Old Drujahad out of fire and mud and placed them here on Earth in an effort to create life himself. Despite trying to usher in their uncanny existence through magic, the pile of fire and mud remained lifeless, as it does. That is until nighttime came, when the Old Drujahad sprang into life, where they were then instilled with purpose and function, thus giving birth to the Old Druhem, who became became Earth's first life forms. The 369 monstrous demonic children that wielded an unimaginable power which would later lay the foundation myths of we humans. Essentially, every demonic beast of folklore and legend that you could imagine. The thing is though, the Watchers were repulsed by their new creations and so they went to war with them, eventually banishing them from existence and forcing them into the dark places of the world. The Old Drujahad were then sealed and imprisoned in golden cocoons and cast out into the abyss for all of eternity, where they now wait in suspended animation. And of course, that's when we get to Hellboy, who wields the right hand of doom, the last remaining limb of Anum after he was torn to pieces by the rest of the Watchers for creating evil in the universe. Poor guy. The thing is, what is so damn awesome about the Old Drujahad is that by proxy, we humans are creations of the same stuff that formed these cosmic horrors. That's food for thought, eh? Coming in at number 2, the God Hand Berserk. Alright, this one is going to be a little difficult to explain, but oh boy, are these guys the very definition of an overwhelming force of something. It kind of depends on how you feel about the true nature of the human soul, but hey, that's reason enough to check the remarkable Berserk series out. Now, I know that quite a few of you guys are huge fans of the Berserk series, and whilst I'm not as well versed as some of you, believe me, I'm trying to churn my way through it, and so on that point, forgive me if I get any of the specifics wrong. Hey, it's a pretty damn elaborate story that transcends all of time and space. I'm trying my best here. The thing is, the titular monsters of this list are perhaps the wrong term in this regard. Entities is probably a better one, because as I said, it depends on which side of the fate of humanity you fall upon. However, in terms of cosmic horror, yeah, there's nothing quite like the God Hand. And in a much more similar vein as Hellboy and the implication that it carries, these guys do things in an incredibly different kind of way. As the series explains, the God Hand is a quintumvirate of demonic sovereigns who act as physical executors of the idea of evil's will by virtue of their desires being intrinsic to the given entity. It's complicated, but essentially the idea of evil is a primal entity that resides in the abyss, which in some senses is far outside the realms of what defines the classic cosmic horror, and one that is responsible for the fate of humanity, acting on the species' collective desire. It is the reason for pain, the reason for sadness, the reason for life, and the reason for death, and it embodies the collective will of the universe experiencing itself. Yeah, and these guys carry out that will. Each member of the God Hand at some point in time was once a human that held possession of an arcane artifact, the Crimson Beherit, which unbeknownst to them distinguished them as individuals that were destined to be reborn as these demonic kings. Each of them possessed specific reality-altering abilities, one that can augment both the spatial, the physical, and the metaphysical planes and bend them to their will. You see, because they draw these incredibly powerful cosmic forces from humanity's primal essence, again, it suggests that we might have something to do with the horror behind it all. Again, that's food for thought, right? And finally, coming in at our number 1 spot, the Chaos Gods, Warhammer 40k. Okay, listen guys, public service announcement. In part 1 of this series, quite a few of you found umbrage with the fact that the Chaos Gods of Warhammer 40k didn't find their place on our list. Let me clear that up. Bloodborne took our number 1 spot, granted, because they are cosmic horror monsters incarnate, and when you have to pick between the two, they both deserve a number 1 spot, so much that putting them on the same list at another point just wouldn't do them justice. So yes, the Chaos Gods take number 1 here, and rightfully so, because as many of you will now know, the Chaos Gods are cosmic horror incarnate. Again, also known as the Dark Gods or the Ruinous Powers, they are the de facto and all-powerful entities who inhabit and control the psychic dimensions that underlies all of physical reality, known as the Warp. They are created and sustained by the emotions and collective desires of every sentient being in the material universe, and when an emotional belief in real space grows strong enough, it then becomes embodied as one of the sentient denizens of the Warp. And thus, we have the 4. First amongst them, Khorne, the Lord of Battle, the Chaos God of blood, war, and murder, whose domain covers the most basic and brutal of sentient emotions and actions. Hate, anger, rage, war, and killing. Blood for the Blood God, skulls for the Skull Throne, and all that. Then we have Tzeentch, the bizarre and ever-changing architect of fate, the changer of ways, the chaos god of all-encompassing change, evolution, intrigue, and sorcery, who pits his denizens against each other in a galaxy-wide game of manipulation. Then there is Nurgle, the plague lord, the chaos god of disease, decay, death, and destruction, and most importantly, despair. The lord of pestilence thrives on misery, and when he awoke in the warp, great plague swept across the galaxy, heralding his birth. Talk about a birthday pie. And finally, there is Slaanesh, the Dark Prince, the chaos god of pleasure, excess, and decadence. He thrives upon lust, pride, and self-indulgence, and seeks to overthrow all decent behavior through hedonism and pleasure for its own sake. In the grim darkness of the Warhammer 40k universe, there is nothing more powerful and cosmically horrifying than the Chaos Gods. And that is exactly why it takes our number 1 spot. Kicking off at number 5, the Frexians, Magic the Gathering. Alright, in part 1 of this series we feature some pretty terrifying cosmic horror entities found within the remarkable lore of Magic the Gathering, and whilst I'm aware that a boatload of you are fans of that particularly awesome CCG and found great joy in us featuring the horrifying Eldrazi, there is one plane of unbridled pain and misery that still remains. Now, it is also important to note that the reason these particularly cosmic horror monstrosities only find themselves at our number 5 spot is because technically they're kind of a little bit too artificial for our cosmic horror liking. But still, aside from that, these creatures are hella messed up. The Frexians that hail from the plane of Frexia, an artificial plane of mechanical and biomechanical life, an entire ecosystem comprised entirely of metal, death and bioengineered tissue. The Machine Hell, an entire plane of misery created with the sole purpose of furthering its artificial horror. Originally the plane of Frexia was a regular old metal plane in the myriad worlds of Magic the Gathering, but that's before a figure known as Yawgmoth showed up, brought there by the planeswalker Diffid of the Thran Empire, as the two of them fled a great virus that was destroying their people, and with them Yawgmoth offered a cure, essentially replacing the mortality of those afflicted with engineered artifice. But as is usually the case when you play God on a new mortal plane, things quickly got out of hand. Well, I say quickly, but what I really mean is over thousands of years, as these new Frexian lifeforms evolved into all manners of horrifying creations: witch engines, birth priests, flesh reavers, hollow dogs, plague dreadnoughts that spout bile from their spore engines and litter the plane of Frexia with their bio-machine hell life. Over a long enough span of time, a vast social order of Frexia has emerged, a horrifying food chain of machine churches and rituals, constantly administering pain and misery to further the evolution of their machine species across the nightmarish machine world. The 9 spheres of Frexia have enough cosmic horror crammed between their gears for us to make an entire list of its own, and whilst technically cheating with the whole artificial thing, this world is a shambling set of horrors that would make Cthulhu himself wince. Swinging in at number 4, Aboleth, Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, if you have a fear of snakes and or eels and or cosmic horror serpents, you should probably look away now. Why did it have to be cosmic horror snake eels? You see, just as we also featured the Illithids of the Underdark on our previous list, the best tabletop RPG ever created of all time, Dungeons and Dragons, has much more up its sleeve when it comes to the inner workings of cosmic horror. And whatever you may have thought of the Illithid and their brain slug, ear crawling ways, the Aboleth race of the Far Realm certainly give them a run for their money. And if you ever thought a race of giant serpentine space fish with 1,000 teeth couldn't ever forge their own society and culture for us to be cosmically baffled and horrified at, then think again. Actually, don't think, shut off your mind, because Aboleths feed on psionic energy, and oh no, we've only gone and done it now. Appearing as fish-like amphibians of immense size, the Aboleth species appear as a bizarre eel with long tubular bodies, with their maws resembling that of a lamprey filled with rows and rows of serrated and jawless teeth. They breathe through a thick grey mucus-like substance which covers their body, and they exude from 4 pulsating organs that line their strange serpentine form. However, the most terrifying facet of the Aboleth species is their immensely powerful psionic abilities, and much like the Illithids of the Far Realm, they thrive on manipulating and feeding on the life essence of sentient creatures. The Aboleth have infinite memories, and their species share a network of consciousness inherent with the memories of all of their ancestors. All of their species are hermaphroditic and possess the capability of laying their own eggs roughly every 5 years, up to 9 at a time, that then hatch into fully functional Aboleths ready to spread more terror throughout the cosmos. Aboleths are terrifying and they're gross, and there's kind of no stopping them, actually. Next up at number 3, Sithis, the Elder Scrolls. Okay, again, much like with our other 2 entries, we've previously covered some pretty terrifying cosmic nasties of similar franchises, namely the Daedric Princes, who are a whole other level of horror, but there is one particular entity of the Elder Scrolls that I would still like to talk about, although it kind of pains me to do so, considering the fact that the Sithis is the embodiment of emptiness, which is a paradox of a head scratcher, and also sums up just exactly how bleak and despairing this particular entity really is. In the rich and all-encompassing lore of the Elder Scrolls series, Sithis, also known as Akel, Sithisid, Saiji, and the Dread Father, is a deity representative of the complete and utter emptiness of the void. And just like any other all-evil deity worth their salt, in this series he's worshipped primarily by the Dark Brotherhood, who, let's face it, should always be your choice in the game, as well as many other cults across Tamriel. The thing is though, what is utterly compelling about Sithis from a cosmic horror perspective is his interaction with the mortal realm. and he has tiptoed his way across the world like some spindly Nyarlathotep, spreading his influence in one way or the other, if you could call it that. You see, Sithis is neither an Aedra nor a Daedra in the cosmology of the Elder Scrolls. In fact, it is widely theorized that this creature was solely responsible for giving life to the Daedric Princes that populate the realms of Oblivion. Sithis is most prominently considered to be the birth soul incarnate of Padome, the primordial cosmic force of change and chaos, and the force in complete antithesis to Anu, the primordial cosmic force of order. And as you may imagine, being the literal avatar of chaos has caused quite the calamity over the ages. You see, the worship of Sithis is rejected by most cultures in the Elder Scrolls series, but that didn't exactly stop him from spreading his will. If you know anything about the Elder Scrolls, you'll know that a figure known as the Night Mother is one particularly horrifying facet of that lore. Well, yeah, as you may imagine, the Night Mother was created after Sithis impregnated a poor unassuming Dunmer woman who then gave birth to 5 children. Sithis corrupted her mind into sacrificing these 5 children to him and the Void, and to cut a long story short, that's how we get the Dark Brotherhood. Just another day in the life of Sithis. Coming in at number 2, Yogg, the Lord of Empty Abodes. Alright guys, I'm just going to preface this particular point with the fact that a few of you have recently found umbrage with the lack of Robert E. Howard on this channel. Guys, chill. Robert E. Howard is brilliant. Conan the Barbarian is my guy, but sometimes Howard's work is so rich and specific in sword and sorcery that it's hard to feature his many creations on any given list. It's nothing personal, but the cosmic horror beneath Howard's rich universe takes some hefty unearthing, and it often requires a particularly capable barbarian. On this one though, we can certainly feature one of his most cosmically terrifying of unknown entities, Yogg, the Lord of Empty Abodes. In the Hyborian Age, it goes without saying, but the primordial earth that Robert E. Howard created had its fair share of monstrosities for Conan to handle, and its fair share of cultists to do the worshipping. The worship of Yogg dates back to the Kari invasion, and many Ryborian scholars speculate that Yogg was a demon of the Elder Night, ancient entities like those worshipped before the fall of Atlantis. You see, those that worship Yogg followed a simple doctrine. They could only ever eat meat, no plants or plant matter of any kind, and they must consume human flesh at least once per month. Those that failed this simple task were considered ritually unclean until they had done so. You see, the cosmic horror that lies behind Yogg, the Lord of Empty Abodes, is perhaps the most bare bones of them all. It is the definitive term of the fear of the unknown, in the sense that throughout Howard's Hyborian Age there are clear examples of this fully fleshed religion, and yet no explanation as to why this cosmic entity requires the consumption of human flesh. At each full moon, the worshippers of Yogg would dig a pit, in which their priests would then pour volatile oils into it and set it alight. They believed that once per month they must eat the moon, and they would go to great lengths during this ritual to eat any outsiders in front of their cosmic pyre that had recently strayed into their cult, in some cases with over 40 people partaking in the Feast of the Flesh. Yoggites are pretty devout, to say the least, and yet the parameters of their cosmic horror deity remains a complete and utter mystery. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the Deadlights. It. Okay. My arm has been well and truly twisted, and although our many lists of Stephen King's horror creations have been penned over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, when we talk about the specifics of cosmic horror, we'd be serving an injustice not to feature Pennywise the Dancing Clown and the anomalous entity behind it, the Deadlights, a bizarre and utterly perplexing creation of the Todash darkness, and a figure in the multiverse of Stephen King that is still yet to be elaborated upon, and in all likelihood that's exactly how it will be left. King himself knew better than many other authors that the purpose of putting the horror in cosmic horror is to rely on the ambiguity of the truth, and because of that there will only ever be illusions as to how or what or where or who the Deadlights came into existence by, who created it, or what it even is. But one thing remains the same: the Deadlights came to Earth to wreak havoc upon the poor town of Derry, Maine, before being banished in the ritual of Tude by the Losers Club once and for all, and yet still somewhere it exists in the void of space, feeding off of the misery of others, longing for the purest of all fear, a child's fear. The unknown entity itself, through it, which takes the form of Pennywise the Dancing Clown, a giant horrifying spider, or any other eater of worlds that it so desires, is the embodiment of all things cosmic horror. We know nothing about the Deadlights as to whether it is a single species or a collection of species, other than the fact that they were a set of writhing radiant orange lights exuding the primal form of all eldritch energy from the Todash darkness of the void, which is the place in between worlds. And that's that's about it really, as so far as the knowledge behind the Deadlights that we possess. In the confines of the Dark Tower series, small fragments of the possible truth are offered. We know that the Crimson King himself wields the Deadlights as a type of magical force, but we never truly understand as to whether he wields the essence of it or just a version of it. And here's where the true horror beauty of Stephen King's cosmic horror lies. We, the reader, are left to fill in the gaps. We, the reader, are responsible for finding the true terror that lies in the space in between. It's our responsibility to stare into the abyss to see what stares back. Hopefully it's not a dancing clown with a gaping maw of razor sharp teeth. That's never fun. Stay safe, everybody. Kicking off at number 5, the Eldrazi, Magic the Gathering. And it will be important to note that in this list, of course, please don't expect Lovecraft. We have many lists dedicated to that particular pioneer of cosmic horror that you should check out if you haven't already. And this one is a little bit of a curveball. Also, as a small departure from the norm, this list will be multimedia, not just cinema or literature, so keep up. And of course, what better way to portray multimedia than with a collectible trading card game? Perhaps one of the best of them ever made, actually, Magic the Gathering, one of the longest running and most successful tabletop games ever made, that employs such a fantastically rich lore that it would give most expanded universes a run for their money. And of course it wouldn't be an expanded universe without a whole host of horrifying cosmic entities, the Eldrazi, an ancient race native to the blind eternities, the space in between the planes of the multiverse, full to the brim with eldritch energies of chaos. As a side note, that's always the case, isn't it? Cosmic horror is always birthed in between something, not quite the physical or not quite the metaphysical. It's the cracks in between that space. Hey, it's food for thought. And talking of food, the Eldrazi are the epitome of the eaters of worlds. Their very nature is a ceaseless hunger, where they travel between planes of existence, devouring every last ounce of their life's energies until that plane embodies destruction, a hollow and desolate husk of its former self, where they then just move on to the next. The Eldrazi are many, but they are also unknown as to the extent of their kind. On Zendikar, one of the native planes that the game takes part in, 3 Eldrazi titans were bound there: Emrakul, the Titan of Corruption, Ulamog, the Reeking Titan, and Kozilek, the Butcher of Truth. Pound for pound, these Eldrazi horrors may well be some of the most horrifying entities ever created in cosmic horror fiction. And yeah, they're part of a card game. Go figure. Coming in at number 4, the Old Gods, Warcraft. Alright, okay, this one is a little close to my heart, because before I became enthralled by the many intricacies of cosmic horror and then later found the fiction of Lovecraft, Derleth and many others, the first time I ever dipped my toe into the eldritch pond of cosmic horror was with this game. Warcraft 3 specifically, but later with World of Warcraft. And if we're being honest, while slightly cartoonish, the Old Gods of Warcraft are perhaps the most truest to form in modern fiction, and perhaps more so than any other cosmic horror trope. These guys would certainly make Lovecraft himself pretty proud. The Old Gods, also known as the Dread Elders, the Elder Gods, the Old Lords, the Primevals, and the Old Whisperings, are chaotic physical manifestations of the Void, the cold physical manifestation of all dark energy in the Warcraft universe. Whilst there are thought to be 6 of them, there are only 5 named Old Gods: Cthulhu, Yogg-Saron, Yasaj, N'Zoth, and G'huun. Each and every one of them are nightmares incarnate, entire mountains of blighted flesh and writhing tentacles that grow like cancerous tumours, spreading and twisting their form throughout the Great Dark. Their only purpose in existence is to transform the worlds that they infest into places of despair and death, burrowing deep beneath the earth, waiting for millennia at a time to enact their eldritch designs. The thing is, Warcraft as a fictional body took the themes of Lovecraft's Old Gods and instead turned them into a seed of corruption, almost a tool of the ultimate evil. The Old Gods in Warcraft serve only to consume, opposed to the many virtuous factions laid out throughout the game's universe with the forces of nature as well as the Void's counterpart, the Light. Now, whilst we could talk about the impossibly rich lore of the Old Gods for an entire video, the sheer beauty of these entities comes with how, for a game that has been out for nearly 2 decades, they continue to be so damn mysterious. Cosmic Horror 101. We could learn a few lessons there. Next up at number 3, Area X Annihilation. And throughout this video you may well find yourself asking the question, what exactly constitutes a cosmic horror monster? What separates a regular science fiction entity from the rest? Why isn't, say, the Borg from Star Trek on this list? They're scary, right? They're terrifying. Why can't they be on here? And I'd say, that's a good question. Admittedly, cosmic horror is a formless type of convention. Lovecraft laid down the rules, but they're not necessarily always adhered to, or even rules. They've always been a little bit too weird to be straight up sci-fi, and that's where I think the fine balance is found. Cosmic horror is the fear of the unknown. Yeah, the Borg are mysterious, but we know quite a lot about them as a culture in Star Trek. Area X though, yeah. Your guess is as good as Jeff Vandermeer's, and if you read his 2014 weird nature novel Annihilation, you'll know that when we say Area X, we don't just mean a portion of land, we mean a living and sentient, maybe, organism. I think. Yeah, there's the cosmic horror part. In Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy, the series paints the picture of an uninhabited and abandoned section of the United States now known as Area X, which forms the main setting for his 2014 novel Annihilation, and later the following novels Authority and Acceptance. Now, although the understanding of this place is elaborated later on in the narrative, all we really know is that before the events of the novel, a meteor crash landed just off the coast of a lighthouse in the southern United States that gradually began to augment the way that nature interacted with its own landscape. Now, although Alex Garland's interpretation of the film gave a much more visual explanation to this life form, what the novel lays out is the essence of cosmic horror, an unknown, incomprehensible, certainly sentient life form whose sole motivation is to make things whole again. Perhaps part of it. Yeah, if it all sounds a little loose, that's because it is. The Southern Reach series in many ways is the documentation of something that the human mind cannot comprehend, and in that, it's pretty damn terrifying. Coming in at number 2, the Daedric Princes, the Elder Scrolls. And I for one am certainly happy that we can finally find a place for these 17 androgynous Lords of Oblivion, the Daedric Princes. And if you've ever played any of the many games in the Elder Scrolls series, this one will perhaps bring a smile to your face. But that is not to deny the fact that when you actually break apart the concept of the Daedric Princes and their role in this frighteningly brilliant expanded universe, these guys are terrifying. They really are. And although different in form, quite a few of the Daedric Princes are messed up. And it may also take a little bit of explaining first, because in the Elder Scrolls series, the world that it takes place within Tamriel is a vassal plane to the many realms of Oblivion, the Daedra, an almost multiversal void of existence that existed before the very stars of the universe. The Daedra themselves, the entities that inhabit the realms of Oblivion, cannot be killed as they reside outside of our understanding of existence, but only banished. And the most powerful of these Daedra are the Daedric Princes, the old gods. Now, whilst these Daedra can manifest themselves as either male or female, all of these Daedra are typically referred to as princes. 16 of them, in fact with the 17th being added Jiggalag following the expansion events of Elder Scrolls Oblivion. As is the case with many instances of cosmic horror though, throughout Tamriel's history, mortals have frequently summoned the Daedric Princes for both worship and study, and in some cases to make deals with them. Quick hint, that's never a good idea. You see, each Daedric Prince has some degree of patronage over a physical, philosophical or metaphysical concept, and interestingly still, as is a rare case in cosmic horror, some of these princes have been known to reward and actively protect their followers. Undoubtedly though, the most evil of them all is Marunes Dagon, the Prince of Destruction, violent upheaval, energy and mortal ambition, who wants nothing more than constant destruction. That's about it. Also there's Molag Bal, but he's more of a jerk, really. If you're jonesing for some awesome interdimensional lore, I'd highly recommend delving into the Daedric Princes, because there is a lot to be discovered here, and compared to most modern fiction, they are actually incredibly unique. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, the Great Ones, Bloodborne. And you know what? I'll accept that quite a few of you wouldn't have necessarily considered Bloodborne worthy of a list like this, but in my opinion, I honestly think one of the best interpretations of cosmic horror in the past few decades has been this game. Bloodborne bleeds cosmic horror. It is coded in Eldritch scripture, and it's one of the most truest to form pieces of horror entertainment in a long, long time. Bloodborne, it just gets everything right, from the landscape to the design of its many monstrosities, but most importantly, its final pantheon, the Great Ones, are the definition of cosmic horror. The thing is though, where the design of this masterpiece of lore goes one further, is that Bloodborne employs a hybridity of cosmic horror. Human beings, the kin, characters that appear in the game that were graced by an eldritch knowledge through contact with the Great Ones and have become impossibly powerful themselves. Personally, I love that, because the subgenre has always gave human beings a bit of a bum deal, and it's awesome to see us getting some kind of a chance in Bloodborne lore. But yeah, even that's not enough. You see, even the kin don't have a single clue as to the extent of the Great Ones. If we were to put a scale of eldritch power, pretty much every single one of the Great Ones would rival the most powerful of Lovecraft's creations. Azathoth eat your own heart out, bud. If you've got one, that is. The Great Ones themselves are unknown beings that are impossible to explain or even comprehend through human thought. They merely exist, and humanity are at the beck and call of their unknowable desires and motives. There is the brain of Menzies, a giant rotting brain with 1 billion eyes, and its patron, Murgo's wet nurse, a 6-armed Grim Reaper with no head. There's the Moon Presence, the very creator of the nightmare that the game takes place in. And then there's Oedon, an entity that has become so powerful that he has transcended beyond all others, to the point that he no longer has a physical body, but instead just a voice and an impossible influence. Honestly, Bloodborne and Cosmic Horror go together like steak and eggs and whiskey. And not only is it Cosmic Horror 101, it's also a freaking fantastic video game. It really is. And it's also really, really, really difficult to play. Check it out if you haven't.